Okay, I think we have a little bit of a delay here, but why don't we, Jackie Lorenzana, which is part of our network board here, she will be introducing our guest speaker today. So I will have Jackie join us right now to introduce Chris Griffin.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hope you're having a productive day today. I just wanted to introduce to you Chris Griffin from LaRocca Inspection. By the way, Chris Griffin became a journeyman plumber and was a plumber contractor for 18 years. When a friend of his, LaRocca Inspection, recruited him as a general physical home inspector in 2000. He obtained his general contractor's license and increased his role with LaRocca Inspection, becoming the director of inspector training in 2002. And because of his extensive plumbing knowledge, founded Sewerline Check in 2004, which provides sewer inspections services to the buyers, sellers, and property owners. Chris Griffin quickly became passionate about educating realtors in the field of real estate inspections and was able to cultivate a relationship of cooperation and transparency. In 2007, Chris was asked to become a general manager of LaRocca Inspections and later became the managing partner in 2012, and more recently became full partner in all of their inspection companies. In 2019, sadly, John LaRocca passed away. Chris stepped in to John's shoes as president of LaRocca Inspections and the Check companies. Returning his passion a few years ago, Chris has been educating realtors, home buyers, investors, and sellers regarding property inspections, standards, benefits, and protection. He appreciates the light bulb moments he can help create with people for the value of the importance of property inspections. When he has downtime, Chris likes spending time with his wife and family, cooking for his family and friends, and caring for their 3 basset hounds, an avid fisherman of the Pacific Ocean and a certified dive master who relishes scuba diving in the South Pacific whenever possible. Everyone, I welcome you, Chris Griffin from LaRocca Inspection and Check Companies.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. That was a great introduction. I appreciate that. I'm going to share my screen with you all. And can everybody see what's on screen there? All right, terrific. Thank you, Hiroko. All right, well, thank you again for once again inviting me to the Women's Council of Realtors, Los Angeles, Beverly Hills. I always have such a great time doing my presentations for your group. Like my bio says, I am very passionate about sharing information that I have obtained and learned and experienced through my many years. I've been in the home inspection real estate business for 22 years. And prior to that, I was a plumber and a general contractor, as my bio states. So I've got basically a wealth of information based on experience and doing, these things. And then, of course, being involved with it and whatnot. And I've always thought that the home inspection trade, this arena, what we do, and you as realtors, we're really a team. We're a team that needs to be working together and should be working together to help our clients, our mutual client, find those homes and those properties that they desire to have, to live forever, to do a business out of, or whatever they're doing, to raise a family, so forth and so on. So that's really how LaRocca looks at it as far as what we do. We're really on your team. We're there to help. So without further ado, what we're going to do is we are going to talk about mold today. This is my moisture and mold class. This is a little bit beyond 101. I think I'm going to be sharing with you some information that you will likely be surprised by today, maybe hopefully learn something. And keep in mind, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box. We'll get to them towards the end of the presentation. And of course, I can always be contacted personally through my office to further assist. So we're going to start out with moisture. Moisture may lead to mold growth. Now, it says may lead to mold growth. Basically, you can't have mold without moisture. So if you do have moisture and then a couple of other sort of key ingredients, parameters, if you will, you will have mold. There's just no doubt about it. So moisture may lead to mold growth. Now, there's 3 different agencies who we would consider experts in this arena. The Centers for Disease Control. Mold grows where there is moisture. And that's the Centers for Disease Control.gov. The key to mold control is moisture control. That's from the Environmental Protection Agency. And the last one is, since mold requires water to grow, it is important to prevent excessive moisture in buildings. And that's from the Occupational Safety and Hazards Administration. Safety and Health, Administration. So what is mold? What is mold? Mold is a fungus. It's a fungus which reproduces by sending out spore. Now, a spore basically is a microscopic, very, very, very small, basically piece of mold. It's a living thing. And what it does is these spores become airborne, and they land in certain areas of the home or the building or the structure or the environment outside, obviously. And then they start to grow. They start to grow. Now, here's a little fun fact for you. Especially in this inspection arena, right? We're here, I'm talking about mold, I'm talking about a mold inspection. Many people think that you can walk through a home or a building and you're looking for mold. Well, I would say that because you don't see mold doesn't mean you don't have mold. By the time you see mold, you have, let's just say, billions of spores of mold sitting on that wall. Typically, the average mold, you can fit approximately 1 million spores of mold on the head of a pin. On the head of a pin, 1 million spores. So if you see mold growing on your wall, you've got millions to billions of spores sitting on that wall. Mold can be undetectable. We're going to be talking about that a little bit further in the presentation here. But the idea is that typically a mold inspection is not done to walk around and look for mold. You as agents can do that. A home inspector can do that. A termite inspector can do that. This inspection, a mold inspection, is done a little bit differently than any of those inspections. Mold is also nature's recycler. We see mold, in the environment, out in the woods. It decays the trees. It helps to eat, if you will, or decay things that are dying and just laying on the forest floor. It recycles it. It recycles it. Now, mold it's very interesting because mold, you can see here on the strawberries, if left alone, these strawberries literally would end up being eaten by the mold. Mold actually is a living, eating thing. Now, mold can create health issues. I'm not a doctor. My companies, we're not health experts, but we do know that in different individuals, mold can have different effects on different individuals. Obviously, the elderly or young children, maybe with breathing disorders, or anybody with breathing disorders, or a weakened immune system, mold can create different health issues in varying people. Different molds can also cause different health issues in varying people. There's as many different types of mold as there are people. I mean, there are a lot of different types of mold, and people can be affected by them differently. So you can't necessarily say, do I have mold? Am I going to get sick? It really kind of depends on sort of your health parameters and what type of mold it is and how much of it there is. Little fun fact for you again, you may or may not know this, but there's mold all around you. There's mold all around you all the time. There's a saying, I think, that you're never more than 6 feet away from a spider. Well, I guarantee you, you're never more than a few inches away from mold. There's mold in our air. There's mold in our environment. Your pets track it into the home on their paws, on their fur. We live with it every day. And that's sort of the kind of a key to understanding mold. It's like mold is not necessarily something that you have to be afraid of. Just a little bit of information, some education about mold, and to help you handle it and keep it, from getting out of control in a home, I think is the key ingredient. So how does mold grow? Well, we talked about earlier that mold needs water to grow. Well, there's 2 other ingredients that mold needs. Mold needs low light and a food source along with that water. Without these three ingredients, mold cannot exist. It cannot begin to take hold, and it can't exist. So basically what we have is, in the case of the strawberries, we have mold on those strawberries. Now, if you were to put a little, maybe a cover over those strawberries and just leave it where those spores, because remember, it reproduces by sending tiny spores out. So if there's airflow in the house at all or in the room at all, people moving by, walking by, or the air conditioner's on, those spores will become disconnected from the mold that's on the strawberry and travel over to another area and land. If there is moisture in that area, if there's low light in that area, and if there's a food source in that area, and a food source will basically be anything that's made of organic, or anything that's organic, anything that has organic materials in it will be a food source for mold. But if you were to take those strawberries and cover them up, eventually what would happen is those strawberries would basically just rot away. The mold would eat it, and that mold would die. It would no longer exist. There's no longer food there, and there's no longer moisture there for the mold to exist. But typically that's not what we do. We typically throw the strawberries away and they end up in the trash, and then they're gone and they're out of the house. Here's some pictures of some low light conditions where we can often find visible mold. This is an attic underneath a kitchen sink cabinet. There's mold growing on the wall here. And if you see on the right side of the screen, on the lower right of this picture, you can see there's moisture on the bottom of this cabinet. This moisture is creating enough condensation or moist air inside this cabinet where mold is now beginning to grow on this wall. Now you may say, Chris, well, that's a wall, that's painted wall. How has that got food in it, right? Let's go back to our three ingredients. How is that food? If you were to look at the ingredients of paint, many different paints, or the drywall has paper on it. And then the paints may have an organic material in it. And that's what the mold is feeding off of. If you were to just take paper and put it underneath the kitchen sink and let it sit there, mold would begin to grow on that paper because the paper is the cellulose material, organic. And then there's moisture being created by this leak of the paper, garbage disposal, creating moisture, and you close the doors and you have a low light condition. This is a very common area to find mold. Back up in that attic that we were looking at before, the insulation has been removed, this one here. And what we find is that there has been moisture coming into this attic from improperly installed attic ventilation. These little pieces of ventilators here, these plastic ventilators, they were improperly installed and they're actually blocked by the attic insulation underneath. And so the air can't properly travel. The moisture gets up in there and then the air doesn't travel well enough to dry it out. And eventually the mold starts to grow on the organic material, in this case being wood. Here's underneath the house, and again, mold growing on the bottom of the wood or the flooring, the framing members of the floor. Again, this is because the house had moisture underneath it because the rainwater and the groundwater wasn't properly controlled at this house, and it seeped in through the foundation, created damp soil underneath the house, and here we have mold. Now, in this case and in this case, that mold is hidden from view. So basically, as a homeowner, unless you're crawling underneath your house every few weeks to see if you have a leak, or every few months, or once a year, I would say is probably good. This can occur. Mold grows within 24 to 48 hours of a moisture source. So you could check it one day, and then a week later, you could potentially have mold if you all of a sudden had a leaky pipe or something like that. So it's very quick for mold to start growing if those three ingredients are there. Again, the food source, the low light conditions, and the moisture. This is just another example of mold growing where there's moisture and food. Here we have ceiling tiles made of cellulose material. There's obviously been moisture leaking. This is from a roof leak. You can see on the paint here on the right side of the screen, the lower right, that paint is sort of bubbling and peeling away. That's because moisture is wicking down. It's osmosing, seeping into that wall. If this layer of wallpaper were peeled back, you'd likely see mold behind that. But this is definitely visible mold. And again, this is just an example of a food source. Now here's a metal framed window. And this goes back to what I was saying before. about metal is not an organic material, but we have mold growth right in here. This mold is growing actually on the paint. It's actually growing because there's organic materials in the paint, and now the mold is growing and feeding off of that. The window is leaking, so there's a constant source of moisture from condensation and or rain. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that another fun fact, this one may gross some of you out, I don't mean to, but as you walk through the room, pieces of your skin just sort of fall off, and they're everywhere. If you were to take a microscope throughout your house and look on your countertops, you'll find your skin on the countertops, hair follicles, eyelashes. Just when we walk through a room, we create our own dust, if you will. If skin were to land on a wall like this and stick, that becomes a food source for a little while for the mold. This house had a moisture, a leak in the roof. The carpet got wet. And you can see here that the backing to the carpet, there's no mold on that. That's made out of a rubber type of material. So it doesn't have any organic materials, but the mold is sticking to the actual floor. Because the floor is made of wood, so it's going to eat, again, the organic materials. This house had a flood and the baseboards were pulled back. Now, imagine if the baseboard was still there and the floorboards were up to that baseboard. You wouldn't see mold. You would not see the mold. So again, this is a great example of having mold, but not being able to see it. Okay, so you could walk through doing your avid, your client could walk through doing their due diligence. An inspector could walk through and say, yeah, I didn't see any mold. A client could ask the inspector, well, did you see any mold? And the inspector honestly could say no. And that would be a truthful answer, but yet there is mold in the house. Now, this is kind of the conundrum that you as realtors have to deal with your clients all the time. Do I have mold in my house? Well, I don't know. Let's ask our inspector. Did you see any mold, Mr. or Mrs. Inspector or Miss Inspector? No, I didn't see any mold. Oh, client says, oh, well, good. That means I'm good. Not necessarily. Again, mold can be hidden. So some sources of moisture. Again, we're talking about the moisture being the number one ingredient for mold. Here's some pictures of, you can see, basically a staining on the ceiling. Mold is going to grow on this sooner or later. Now, the brownish stain there, this is just from the moisture sort of coming down through the framing members and creating sort of dirty water. If you open this ceiling up, you will discover mold because the source of moisture is continuous. And above this plaster, there is wood framing. So you're going to find mold here. So as you're doing your avid, of course, you want to look for this. As your client, our mutual client, is walking through their home or their property that they're going to buy, they're doing a bit of their due diligence by doing a visual inspection as well. And if they notice this, they're going to want it noted, and they're going to want further evaluation of this area. So as an avid, you would want to note this down, that there's staining or there's moisture staining on the ceiling. You wouldn't want to say that the roof is leaking. You wouldn't want to say that, there's a broken pipe, because you don't know that. You as real estate agents, I am sure, have done your risk management classes and have been taught how to fill out an avid. You basically want to just state what it is you can actually see. You don't want to sort of try to figure out what is causing it. Leave that to the inspectors, leave that to the experts on this end. You guys just have enough to do with being the conduit of the transaction and keeping everything in order. You don't have to get yourself, step into that arena of trying to be the expert of where it's coming from. Obviously, asking for seller's disclosures here would be paramount in any inspection. So here's an old louvered window on the left here. Obviously, this doesn't seal out the elements very well. You don't see these in present day. You do on an older house, but in a new construction, we wouldn't be using these. This is a plastered wall, and you can see the plaster is popping. So obviously, there's moisture behind this plaster. Now, what's behind the plaster? Behind the plaster is wood. It's the wood framing, and that's where the mold could potentially be if it was behind in this wall. Someone here had a potted plant, and they watered their potted plant, and over time, enough water seeped out of the bottom of the pot, and it created moisture on the wood floor, which then started to lead to mold growth, which then leads to wood rot. Black mold. You guys have all heard this term, right? Black mold. I'm here to tell you that there's no such thing as black mold. That's not to say there's no such thing as mold that is black, the color of black. It's true, but black mold is not a technical term. It's not a scientific term for any type of mold. The mold often referred to as black mold is called Stachybotrys. Stachybotrys or Stachybotrys is a highly toxic mold. It's also a very aggressive mold. It's almost as aggressive as termites. As termites sort of eat the wood, here in Southern California. Stachybotrys does the same. It's sort of just like eats and feeds off the wood. And if left to its own devices, if left alone, and if enough water is continuing to remain wherever it is feeding, black mold can literally almost look like flowing lava. It grows and it ends up in these long strands. It's kind of scary looking, especially when it's there for a very, very long time. But black mold, there's really no such thing as black mold. It's again, Stachybotrys, highly toxic mold. That's the name of it. Any mold, as I said earlier, may cause health problems. Stachybotrys is probably the number one mold that people are concerned with as far as health issues. I think even most very healthy people who aren't susceptible to any sort of mold allergies or anything like that would feel the effects of Stachybotrys. I've been as a home inspector many years ago, I've been in a garage. I remember one time in a garage that had Stachybotrys off in the corner, and within about a minute, maybe a little less than a minute, my eyes started watering a little bit. I felt sort of a sweet kind of taste in my mouth and a tingling a bit in my throat. What that was, I don't know. When I left the garage after observing what I reported as potential mold and have somebody look at it, I felt better within a few minutes of being outside and out of that area. So I imagine it was because the Stachybotrys was there. But I've also been in other situations where I've got mold all around me of different types of mold, and I don't really feel those effects. So again, going back to what I said earlier, that different people can be affected differently by different molds. So what are some outside moisture sources that we as homeowners, you as realtors, and us as inspectors are looking for to help our clients determine how to, or our homeowners, determine how to handle these? Rain, obviously, we want to keep the rain out. We want to keep the roofs leak free. We want to keep the gutters and the downspouts and the property drainage flowing away from the house. Flooding, obviously, there's nothing really you can do about this. When a flood comes, it's going to come. That's Mother Nature. But obviously, there are things, we're going to talk about a little bit about it further into this, towards the end of this presentation about flooding. Drainage issues, this also goes along with the roof and keeping the gutters and the downspouts. And you want the property graded, in other words, sloped away from the structure for at least 6 feet. And that takes that moisture away from the structure. If you had this moisture sitting right here for a very long time, it's going to seep into the ground. And if the vapor barrier on the foundation of the house was breached or damaged or compromised in any way, this moisture ends up underneath the house. And then potentially we end up with that situation that I showed you earlier with the mold underneath the floor. Landscape irrigation, landscaping needs to be sloped away. Planter beds, you need to seal them, up against the house or on the foundation. You don't want your sprinklers spraying the house. The roses are not going to grow if you spray the concrete. Spray the roses, they'll grow. You just don't want that moisture constantly beating on the side of the house. Eventually it will seep in somehow and breach those moisture barriers, those vapor barriers. Obviously humidity, down by the beach here, Florida is a huge area for humidity, and a lot of mold problems in Florida. Many homes down in Malibu, Santa Monica, Venice, the beach communities, they have dehumidifiers in the home to help decrease the humidity inside the home. They leave their windows open a lot for air to breathe or flow through the home so it can breathe. High water tables, this is an issue basically where you have the ground and you have groundwater. And there's some areas that the groundwater is higher than in others. So when you have a heavy rain, it doesn't take too long, but the water starts bubbling up out of the ground. And in some cases, in this particular picture, it actually entered into the garage, up through the slab of the garage. So some indoor moisture sources. Before I get into this, I want to give you a little fun fact, little game that we can play together. What's the #1 day of the year that causes the most moisture inside the home? The #1 day of the year that helps create the most moisture inside your home. That's correct. It's Thanksgiving. The #1 day of the year that actually helps to put the most moisture into your home is Thanksgiving. When you think about it, you've been cooking for days around Thanksgiving. So you've got the pots boiling, the ovens are going, the steam, the dishwasher's happening, the hot water in the sink. You've invited friends and family over. All the moisture, we're bodies. We're made up of a lot of moisture. So our perspiration, so forth and so on. All these people are in the house, you're in a closed room, the air conditioner's running, if you live here in sunny Southern California, you're creating moisture in the house. And the #1 day of the year to create moisture is Thanksgiving. Showering helps to create moisture, obviously. Doing laundry, both the wash cycle and the dryer cycle. Pipe leaks, of course, if you have pipe leaks in the house, that's going to create moisture. Recommend you fix the pipe leaks quickly. Window leaks. We talked about those louvered windows or even those double pane windows where you saw the mold on the metal frame. You want to make sure that these seals are maintained and kept sealed so that the elements can't come in. You can see in this picture, the wood is turning dark from the moisture. Eventually, if this moisture were to remain there and it had low light conditions, this would be mold. The only reason why there's no mold here is because it's a window. There's a lot of light coming in, #1. And the moisture only occurs when the elements outside, whether it be raining or there's condensation, like the heater is running inside and it's cold outside, would create condensation on the window. But if those conditions were to occur long enough, you would see mold there. And then, of course, air conditioning condensation. Anytime you're cooling air, okay, you're running air and it evaporates and you're creating moisture in that air and it's creating moisture condensation. So that's indoor moisture sources. The solution. I touched on this a little bit, just a little bit ago, how as a realtor to help your client with a potential mold issue. And I talked about how oftentimes the realtor will ask the home inspector, did you see mold? Many times, if you don't see mold during your avid, well, your home inspector is not going to see mold, unless, of course, they saw something in an attic or underneath the home in the crawl space or in a dark corner where they're inspecting and you're not. I understand that. But I would suggest using the statewide buyer seller's advisory. This is a CARD document, your California Association of Realtors document, statewide buyer seller's advisory. You all know what this is, and it has a mold section. And in that mold section, it does say buyer and seller are advised that the presence of certain kinds of mold, sometimes referred to as toxic mold, which oftentimes is the Stachybotrys that we were talking about, may adversely affect the property and the health of individuals who live on or work at the property, as well as pets. Mold is often undetectable from a visual inspection, a professional general property inspection, and even a structural pest control inspection. So your brokers, your advisors, your lawyers, your attorneys, your car is telling you that mold is often undetectable from a visual inspection. That would include your avid, a general physical inspection, the pest control inspection, your buyer doing their due diligence, walking through, your seller filling out their disclosures. Okay, mold is often undetectable from a visual inspection. Well, what do you do then? Mold may be caused by water leaks or other sources of moisture, such as, but not limited to, flooding and leaks in windows, pipes, and roof. We went through quite a few of these things. Seller is advised to disclose the existence of any such conditions of which he or she is aware. So if the seller is aware that the roof leaked 2 years ago and they had a fix, they're supposed to disclose that, period. Obviously, they definitely want to disclose if the roof is currently leaking. But I understand sometimes sellers, they forget, they fixed it. Okay, it's out of their mind. But sometimes it's good to ask, okay, jog their memory. Do you know of any present time leaks in the roof or floods in the house or anything like that? Also, you could ask them. Many insurance companies, they would have to disclose if there was a flood, because insurance companies are very concerned about homes having floods. So it's advised to get as thorough seller's disclosures as you can regarding the existence of a moisture condition. Then the buyer should carefully review all of seller's disclosures for any indication that any of these conditions exist. So in other words, if they said, yes, there was a roof leak 2 years ago, the buyer should carefully review that and potentially hire a roofer or talk to the home inspector to help determine if that roof is still leaking or if that repair was done properly. It is, however, possible that mold may be hidden and that seller is completely unaware of its existence. If buyer wants further information, broker recommends that buyer have the property tested for mold by an environmental hygienist or other appropriate professional during buyer's inspection contingency period. You see here, so your advisors, your brokers are not saying that you should ask your home inspector if the house has mold. You should ask your client, are you concerned about mold? If the answer is yes, then you should refer them to this document so that they follow these instructions. If they're concerned about mold or the existence of past, present, or potential future mold, have that property examined by that professional. A general physical inspection, unless it's obvious, is not going to be able to tell that person if there's mold. And also, I would like to remind everyone that general physical property inspectors are not going to say that's mold on the wall. They're going to say that there's a substance on the wall that may be mold. So you see, they're going to be recommending a professional to come in and determine if it's mold or not, just like you would. So the general physical inspection or your AVID is not really going to help the client determine if it is a mold condition or not. I've been in many situations where something was thought of as being mold. It was found out that it wasn't. It was dirt. It was paint splatter. It was something other than mold. But if it is mold, the only one that's going to be able to determine that is that expert. So how is a professional mold inspection done? What is different between a general physical inspection, your AVID, or the client walking through looking for mold? How can a mold inspection help to tell a client if they have mold or don't have mold, or if they have a condition that could lead to mold? So how is it done? Well, first of all, it is a visual inspection. And even your car statewide buyer seller's advisory says, yeah, mold can often be undetectable from a visual inspection. We're not looking for mold. Here's the key. That's the key. We're not looking for mold. We're looking for moisture. As I said earlier in this presentation, without moisture, you can't have mold. We're looking for moisture, whether it be present at the time of the inspection, a potential past condition, or we find a condition that could potentially lead to a future breach or a future moisture intrusion. So if we're seeing like holes in an exterior wall or something like that, or improper ground drainage, something like that, that can potentially lead to a future moisture intrusion issue. We're going to mention that. So what we're looking for is we're looking for moisture. So here, a mold inspector has got a cabinet open. He's looking into that cabinet and he sees moisture right there. Now, this could just be a matter of, okay, it started a few days ago and the pipe is leaking, and it's a matter of fixing it and drying that area up. But if that moisture's been there for a long time, then the inspector is going to want to determine if there's mold growth that they can't see. Next thing they do, if they find moisture or they're in an area, this is an example of where the inspector is looking for potential moisture intrusion that can't be seen. So what he has in his hand here is what's called a moisture meter. And if you look carefully, you can see the little dial, and it's down in the green right now. And he's taking this reading underneath the window and to the right of this door. These are all common areas for moisture to breach or intrude into a home. So the inspector is going to be, again, looking for moisture in these areas using this special tool. They can find moisture just straight up visually with their flashlight, or they can find moisture with a tool. They can also find moisture with this little guy. This is called a FLIR camera. FLIR stands for forward-looking infrared. This is basically military technology. And what it does is it allows the inspector to point this at a wall, an area, a ceiling, a floor, wherever, and you can look at the colors on the screen and you can see temperature differentials, okay? This doesn't tell you if there's moisture. This just tells you if there's a temperature differential. If you have cold water leaking into a wall, that temperature is going to be blue. It's going to be the cooler colors. If you have hot water leaking into the wall, the temperature is going to be red, yellows, oranges, those warmer colors. So we're using this to help determine, like scanning a big area to help determine if there may be moisture there. So let's say we come across as we're looking at something and then we see that there may be moisture there. The inspector will come back with the moisture meter and see what the level of the moisture is. And then if it's okay, then fine, it's okay. If it's pegged in the green or excuse me, pegged in the red or the yellow, then we have some further things that we'll do here in a second. So how does this work? So basically on the left, you have a picture of a sliding glass door leading out to a patio and leading into a kitchen area coming from a patio. And on the right, you have a picture of that same floor with a FLIR camera. You can see this river of water running underneath the tile. You can't see that there. So what we have now is we have water coming into the kitchen underneath the tile. So we have a moisture situation happening under the floor that you cannot see. If you crawled underneath this house, you would begin, if this moisture intrusion was left long enough, you would begin to see the wood rot, the wood damage that this moisture is going to cause, and then, of course, potentially the mold. Here we are up in an attic, and we're looking at a temperature differential of all of this blue area here, right up against, basically right there, right underneath, up against the exterior wall, this blue area. Inspector's curious about that because why, with all this insulation, why is it showing me that it's either very cold here or very damp here? They go downstairs into this closet. This is what they see just through their plain eyes. This is what they see through the FLIR camera. This blue is water. So what we have here is we have a leak. We have a leak coming from this edge of the roof, and that is coming down into this closet. You don't see any damage on this wall, and you don't see any moisture up here. This is all done with just a FLIR camera by looking at the temperature of that and then tracing it down. And then right here, a moisture meter. That little guy was put on that wall and it pegged. So now we know we have moisture inside this wall. At that point, we're going to recommend samples. Because what happens is if we can't see the mold, but we have the parameters that would allow mold to grow, we're going to recommend that we take samples. If we see the mold, we're going to take swab samples. Obviously, you see it, take a swab, Q-tip. If we don't see it, we take air samples. Now, an air sample basically is done in two parts. One, you have what's called a baseline. This little machine basically sucks air in, and it has a little glass plate that you look at under a microscope. And as it's sucking the air in, it's putting any spores or particulates onto that little glass slide. So we take a sample outside the house to get our baseline. Then we take a sample inside the house. If we have higher levels inside the house, we know we have a mold condition inside the house because we will always get mold outside. So we're looking for elevated mold in the house, even if you can't see it. That will lead us to sort of continue our investigation to find where it is. In the case of the closet that we just looked at right here, what we're going to do is recommend a wall cavity sample. So in other words, we punch a small hole in the wall with the permission, of course, of the seller and the real estate agents, or we open up an outlet cover or switch plate cover, and we insert an air sample machine into the wall, and that sucks air out of the wall. And much like this little machine, it's actually putting it onto a slide so that then we can have lab analysis done of those samples. And once we can determine that there is a mold situation occurring, like let's say behind that wall, something can be done about it. Now, obviously, if it's just household mold and regular daily cleaning and things like that, just keep the house clean. Normally keeping your house clean, keeping it maintained, keeping the windows sealed, keeping the moisture moving away from the outside walls, the exterior of the property, so forth and so on. You can take care of it. Household cleaning products. You can mix a little bleach with some water. The little mildew that builds up in your showers, wipe it down with bleach and water. Once a week, go through and clean all of that up. Wipe your countertops down with vinegar and so forth and so on. It'll really help the sort of household molds and mildews that that are common, that are very common. What we're talking about is more of a real mold problem. Obviously, what do you think of that, LaRocca? Now, when I showed you the picture of the flood, right? One of those smaller pictures in the outside sources of moisture, that's a house flood. This is what happens, or this is what can happen when a house floods or a broken pipe in a wall. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, basically says that a homeowner or anyone who's not licensed to remediate mold can remediate up to, I think it's 100 square feet. I may be wrong on that number, but I believe it's a relatively small amount of their own mold. They can remediate it themselves. I personally, being in this industry for so long, I would never recommend that. Never, ever, never. Because I want to leave the remediation to the professional. You don't know how that mold's going to affect your health. You don't know. You don't know if you have the proper respiration device on. You don't know if you've contained the area. Again, going back to earlier in this presentation, mold survives by sending out spores. Spores are so tiny you can't see them. So if this area is not contained, in other words, it's all plasticed off, they have a negative air chamber that keeps the mold spores from even moving. If you don't contain this area properly, you could be sending this mold all over the house. And all it's looking for is a new source of moisture and a new source of food, and it can begin to grow again. So sometimes remediation by a professional is going to be required. After any remediation or the removal of any mold, and I'm not talking about your household molds and mildews, we recommend clearance testing. This is also known as post-validation testing, post-clearance validation testing. Basically, when the remediation is done, you want to come back in and take the samples again. You want to do that outside sample and the inside sample. So now, if everything was done and properly remediated, you won't have the mold spores in the house that you had before. Those counts will be well down, and the outside will be back, it'll be the same as it was, but the differential will be less inside, more outside. That's what we're looking for. So clearance testing, always, always, always don't skip that test if you're taking care of a significant mold issue. Some quick prevention tips. We talked about this, fixing pipe leaks early and right away. Keep the humidity low. Open the bathroom window, turn on the vent fan when you're showering and after your shower. Don't just close everything up. Open the shower curtain, leave it slightly open on both ends so air can travel through there. A quick fun fact for you again. Would you assume that a home that was built in the 40s would have less or more of a mold problem than a home that was built in 1982, 85, 95, 2000, 2020? Would you assume that the older home or the newer home would potentially have more of an issue with being able to keep its moisture levels low? Giving you guys a few seconds to think about that. And the answer is the home that's going to have the higher issue of not being able to control its moisture and keep the moisture levels low is the newer home, Who guessed that? I knew it, but it's the newer home. The reason why in 1976, we started coming out with our energy, codes, and we started wrapping houses and vapor barriers and, making these little, boxes where moisture couldn't get in. And this was a good thing. This is a good thing. But unfortunately, moisture can't get out either. So you can potentially cause situations where that moisture is trapped inside the house. We leave our windows closed now. We run our air conditioners. Back in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, we opened windows, we ran fans. These houses were built on raised foundations, not on slabs. So the air moved underneath the house. The house breathed. It breathed, okay? With the newer style construction and the energy codes having to be met, we basically have created houses that are so energy efficient. They keep the heat and the cold in, and they keep the heat and the cold out, but they're so energy efficient that if there's a moisture intrusion problem, it's going to keep that in as well. And so potentially there could be a bigger issue with those houses. We see more of an issue with newer type construction than we do older. So even more important to open windows, run your fans, keep your shower curtains, any areas of moisture, dry them out as fast as you can. Proper caulking. I talked about earlier that the caulking oftentimes has organic materials in it that the mold can feed off of. Get caulking that's purely synthetic so that there's nothing in that caulk that can mold feed off of. It'll be labeled on the label, mold preventative, mold inhibitive type caulking. Keep filters clean. Obviously, filters, as the air is running through the air conditioner or the heater, it is moving the air through the house, and the filters are trapping the particulates. They can trap mold spores, like a HEPA type filter can trap mold spores up to certain microns. So get the best filters you can for your air conditioning systems. As I said earlier, proper drainage is key. It's very important. Your downspouts should all run away from the house. The property should be graded away from the house, so forth and so on. And professionally handling any flood situation. Again, the CDC says homeowners can do it. Okay, that's fine. If they want to take on that challenge, it is up to them. I don't recommend it. I recommend any sort of major or significant moisture issue to be handled by those professionals. And in closing, I would like to say that it is very, very rare that us as inspectors see a major significant moisture issue occurring within a home on a real estate transaction. It's very rare. We come up with leaks, as every house has them, roof leaks, pipe leaks, moisture intrusion into the house from a foundation issue or something like that. But 9 out of 10, 99 out of 100 probably, I would say that the fix is relatively simple, relatively inexpensive. Even if there is professional remediation required, it doesn't run into the tens of thousands of dollars. It can run into the thousands of dollars for sure. But when you consider, the magnitude of the problem that's being fixed and how often it happens, it's relatively low. So that is my presentation for you this afternoon. And again, I want to thank you for having me here today. I'm going to go ahead and close out my screen so that we can
Thank you so much, Chris. This is
welcome.
really great. I mean, with a lot of information that you gave us today, some of the stuff I didn't even know about. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And we have some questions. Anybody has any questions, you can put in the chat. I'm going to introduce Cindy. She's going to moderate the question and answers. Cindy, are you here?
Hi, thank you so much for Chris for that great presentation. And I see a lot of friends here. We also have our 2023, some of our governing board member, Jacqueline and Renee. Anybody with a question, please raise your virtual hand or please raise your virtual hand. I see none. And I don't think I see anything in the chat as well. Obviously this is crucial, right? Mold is something we deal with on a regular basis. A lot of times we don't see it. And obviously, Chris, I think mold is probably one of the topics that we haven't really talked about within our offices. When we talk about inspection, there's so many other things to look at. The mold is probably something that happens after they may close escrow and find out. I do see there are some questions for you. So Chris, the question from Mary is, can you give us a telephone number for the moisture inspection company? And maybe you can put that in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. The telephone number is my main number. LaRocca
Oh,
Inspections.
okay, great,
Yeah, the LaRocca Inspections and the check companies. We have the 4 companies.
great.
So it's
So maybe
818
this is, yeah.
951 1795. You have that.
Right. We can also, maybe Mary will also help us put in the chat. As you know, they do 4 inspections and this is extremely informative. And I also see another question from Katrina. Did you want to ask, Katrine, did you want to ask the question or do you want me to ask it for you?
Yes, I can. And so after,
Great,
hi
thank
everyone.
you. And maybe introduce yourself and what area you're tuning in from so we know.
And my name is Catherine Wadi. I'm in my main area. I'm working in Los Angeles, California. And then the question I have it because it happened a lot of time after closing the escrow, some mold issues pops up. And actually in one of the transaction I have this issue. I want to see that is the insurance going to cover it after the deal was closed or what's going on?
Well, that's a great question, Katrin. I can't answer that question because the insurance companies are all going to have different policies regarding that. I do know that the home warranty policies typically won't cover a mold issue, but many insurance companies that I've spoken to have dealt with, some do and some don't. You'd have to actually look at that particular policy or speak to that particular insurance agent to get the accurate answer. I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer that accurately for you.
Okay, no worry. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. And next question I have is from Christine. Christine, do you want to go ahead and you want to ask your question and introduce yourself as well? Okay, she may not be able to. So her question in the chat was, Christine asked, do you have any location in San Diego?
Unfortunately, we do not. We're basically based in the LA County area. We go down into Orange County. I would love to talk to you and possibly arrange something if you do have a situation down there that you need help with. It's very possible I could arrange to have a crew or an inspector come down, for the day and help you. Maybe I could help you over the phone and possibly connect you with some people that we do know down there, or we could help you. But that would be something that you would want to call me and we could discuss that.
Yeah, Chris, it sounds like it's an expansion opportunity possibly in the future as you move further south.
That's so funny.
There's a contact for you.
That's so funny you say that, Cindy. We are intending on expanding into different areas. LaRocca is a family-owned company. We've been in business for 28 years, and we've always been very satisfied to be right where we are, and we're very well known. But yeah, it might be time. It might be time to start moving out and branching into other areas. Great,
excellent. I do see 2 virtual hands being raised. One is Sarah, and the other one is Haruku. So if Haruku's okay, I'll go with Sarah first and then come to you. Alrighty. Sarah, you had a question? No?
Sarah,
okay.
Question?
There was another.
I didn't have a virtual hand raised, but yeah, I don't have any questions.
Great. Thank you so much for all of you being on. And Haruku?
Thank you for the great presentation. I just want to know the time frame for the mold inspection. So if somebody is concerned about the mold, and then if somebody addressed to the mold inspection company like your company, it's maybe depend on how badly it's affected, but typically how many days or how many weeks setting up and then test and test again. So some typical time frame. Could you please explain?
I totally understand, Hiroko. Thank you for that. That's an important question. I would say from either the concern or the absolute knowing that you might have a mold situation, From the time that you call to get the inspection, it's going to take probably 1 to 3 days to actually have the inspector out there. It really depends on how busy we are. We have 3 mold inspectors. We're usually able to get to you within a day or 2, but sometimes it's 3. Then the second part of that question, what happens sort of during and after the mold inspection? If there is not a situation that the inspector is too concerned about, you would get that report within 24 hours of sort of an all clear, like, okay, we've done the mold inspection. We're not finding any areas of concern. So you're going to get that report in about 24 hours. If there is an area of concern and samples were taken, it's going to take about 48 hours to get your inspection report, because the sample has to be delivered to a lab. We use an independent lab. So they're basically making their own determination of what that mold is. Then we would come up with a remediation protocol. So you'll have that report within about 48 hours. So once we find out what type of mold it is and what the counts are, and I say the counts, it just sort of means like the magnitude of the situation. Once we know how much mold there is and what type, we then come up with a remediation protocol. In other words, we may recommend cleaning with a biocide. We may recommend professional remediation. We may recommend removal of that, building material and replacing it. So that could take a little while longer. If professional remediation is needed, and depending on how large the mold situation is, that could be up to a few days to a month, depending on how bad it is. But again, as I said, towards the end of this presentation, the 1 month remediations, those are very, very few and far between. Typically, you're looking at about 48 hours to 1 week to have the entire thing handled.
I see. So in the case, if we are during the escrow period and maybe the inspection period, we may be able to fit to get some result.
Absolutely. I would tend to suggest, if it's your typical situation, that would be remedied prior to your escrow closing if you're within, not a 3-day escrow. But if you're in a normal escrow, I would definitely suggest that, that could be taken care of within that time frame.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we're wrapping up on the questions. If anybody else having any questions, this is your last opportunity to raise your virtual hand or type it in the chat. And our last question.
Catherine asked how much will be charged and what about for each sample?
Right.
That's a great question. The mold inspection starts at $325 for the inspection itself. The samples are $125 a piece. Now, remember that samples are not always recommended. One thing that we do differently than many mold companies out there, many mold inspection companies sell you samples automatically. They say, okay, we're going to come do an inspection and we want to take 5 samples, 6 samples, 3 samples, whatever they say. We don't sell you samples when we book your inspection. My inspectors are only going to recommend samples if they see an issue that they think needs further evaluation by getting a sample and determining what's going on here. So your mold inspection is $325. If we take samples, they're $125 each sample. Now, remember, any time that we recommend samples, if it's not swab samples, if it's the air, we have to take at least 2. We have to do the outside baseline and then the inside one. So if it's an air sample already, that's $250 plus the inspection fee.
Thank you so much for all the excellent questions. And thanks, Katrine, for your last question.